because liberty matters, because people's due process right matters. I don't care if they're from the left or the right. The bottom line is the reports of treatment that are coming out of that jail are reprehensible. They are not American.
These scientists may be complicit in one of the greatest crimes against humanity.
But I think it raises a lot of questions about whether the money is going to be funneled ultimately into the Chinese Communist Party and the Chinese military.
You got to pick a side. And General Milley picked one. And it wasn't the red, white, and blue.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm Catherine Mortensen with Americans for Limited Government. And joining us on today's live stream is Kathleen Sgamma. Kathleen is president of the Western Energy Alliance. They're an organization based in Colorado. They advocate for American energy independence and the development of our natural resources. And I'm very grateful for you joining us today, Kathleen. You have a really fascinating background. I read a little bit about your bio. You graduated from MIT and you served for 3 years as a military intelligence officer in the Army. So I'm curious, just starting out, how does that background help you as an advocate for our energy development?
Well, it's really interesting to see what oil and natural gas has become as such a strategic resource for the United States. So that when you see that we became completely energy independent for all intent and purposes a couple of years ago, we became the #1 oil and gas producer in the entire world, the #1 oil producer. And now we have a president who is making it more difficult for American producers to develop oil, at the same time that he's asking Russia and OPEC to increase their oil production. I mean, it just doesn't make sense when we have this great resource here in the United States.
Kathleen, you're right. It doesn't make any sense. And I think one of the things that we're trying to do here at Americans for Limited Government is expose some of the measures in these spending bills that the Democrats are trying to move through the House and Senate that would be harmful to average everyday Americans, people who want smaller, limited government. And one of the things that you have brought to our attention and you've exposed is that they have put in what's called a manager's amendment, Representative Grijalva of Arizona. And what that amendment would do would prohibit future oil and gas leases and nullify existing oil and gas leases that are I guess, what do you call that when they're not in use?
Well, Grijalva wants to put off limits a 10-mile buffer area around Chaco Cultural National Historic Park. And, there's the Navajo Nation, which is in the area, has a resolution where they're supporting a 5-mile buffer. And that's a good balance for protecting the cultural resources in that area, which are this Chaco culture is a very important Native American historic resource there. So the 5-mile buffer that the Navajo Nation wants would protect the resource, but still allow most of the oil development in that area to move forward. And the thing about it is, and one of the reasons the Navajo Nation supports that compromise is that there are Navajo mineral owners in that area who, if you put a 10-mile buffer around the park, they can't develop the oil resources that they own. So that would remove millions of dollars every year from otherwise pretty impoverished families in the Navajo Nation if they can't have their oil resources developed. So Grijalva snuck that in. There's a lot of other measures in the bill that would make it all but impossible to develop on federal lands and waters. And of course, we're not talking about national parks, Yosemite, Yellowstone, but we're talking about those working landscapes all across the West that are owned by the federal government, but that are deemed appropriate for oil and natural gas development through a long public lands planning process. So they want to put off that all off limits, lands and waters, and that would knock out about 20% of American oil and natural gas production. Again, at the same time that the president is asking Russia and OPEC to increase their production.
And do we have any sense right now, Kathleen, of how much income those resources near Chaco Canyon are generating for the Navajo people? Are they currently being used as active leases?
Yes, the Navajo Alatis, or the mineral owners in that area, are developing their resources. Every year, the oil and natural gas industry returns about $96 million to the Navajo mineral owners. So not all of that is right in that Chaco area, but a good portion of it is. So we're talking about significant resources in an area that otherwise, these families, they depend on that income for their livelihoods.
And Kathleen, I think I'm from New Mexico. I'm a native and spent several years in the Four Corners area. So I know historically how important it is for our Native American populations to be able to be independent and be able to provide for themselves, because going back centuries in this country, I mean, they really were deprived of so much of their land and their resources and their ability to be independent. And now here we are in a situation where they have the resources on their land to be independent, provide for themselves. And now we have a federal government attempting to take that away from them. And I think that's just heartbreaking to see how much progress our Native Americans have made in terms of economic independence. And now there's an attempt to sort of take them back to the days where they were just sort of dependent on a government handout.
Absolutely. And it's important to recognize that these Navajo mineral owners, they make sure that the development is done in a way that's protective of cultural resources and the environment. This is their land, this is their income, this is their mineral resources. And by isolating them and putting them off limits, it's not a balance of energy development, and it's not a balance of protecting resources and protecting people's livelihoods. So it's really unfortunate.
And Kathleen, I heard you say earlier that some of the energy policies that Biden has in this bill could reduce our total production by about 20%. What would this mean for just a consumer, someone like myself who buys gas every week and has to heat my home? What would the impact be for those of us who are paying energy costs?
Well, we've already seen prices at the pump go up. They're about $1 more than they were this time last year. We're also seeing that now with natural gas. Natural gas prices have started to go up for the first time in many, many years. And so there's a chance that home heating will be more expensive this winter because natural gas prices are going up. So if we stop producing here in the United States, or if we make it more difficult for producers to produce, then we have to import energy from overseas. And when there's less energy, there's less supply, prices go up. It's, basic economics, really. So these policies threaten to increase prices for consumers even further than they already are right now. And I mean, we'd like to move forward and produce more so that we can reduce your cost of energy. But when the government makes it more difficult, what do? We have to, ask Russia and OPEC, and then, we send billions of dollars overseas and jobs overseas. It just doesn't make sense.
I appreciate you noting that, because I feel like at best, OPEC and some of these other energy suppliers around the world are at best what I call frenemies. Like, they're kind of our friends, but we're not always sure. So I think it's a terrible strategic situation to put ourselves in, where we're relying on them for our energy when we have the resources here at home to develop. And you also noted that this bill would further curtail mineral development by reducing a land swap between the federal government and copper mining interests in Arizona's Oak Flat area. How critical is that situation there?
Oh, I'm sorry. I really only do oil and gas. So
okay.
That wasn't us quoted on that.
Okay. No worries.
But, I think that brings up a great point, which is it's so hard to mine minerals in this country, because anytime there is a proposal to, mine minerals, and if we were going to move to all of these renewables that the Democrats want, and, we want to increase all of our sources of energy, but, it requires a huge amount of mining in order to get the rare earth minerals. So that's unfortunate that they're opposing that type of development as well.
What about what's happening? It says here, the article in the Washington Times says the bill would prohibit new oil and gas leasing in Colorado's Thompson Divide and bars offshore leasing in the outer continental shelf.
Right. So right now we can only develop offshore in the Gulf of Mexico. And so this would ensure that that ban on the outer continental shelf continues forward. Sorry, forgot the second part of that.
What about the Colorado's Thompson Divide?
Thompson Divide. Sorry. So Thompson Divide is an area that has had oil and natural gas development since the 1940s. We've achieved a balance there where we protect the land and still develop energy. And that's not good for a lot of groups that just want to shut down oil and natural gas development. So their talking points are that, we need to protect this area from oil and gas because it's so pristine. But we have been developing there and we have protected it to the point where they consider it pristine. So that tells me that there's a balance, right? We can do both. We can protect the land because we develop oil and gas in a way that protects the land. But we don't have to put those energy resources off limits because, again, we can do both. We can protect the land, we can protect wildlife, air quality, etc., and do that in a responsible manner. So that's what our members are all about, our oil and gas producers. We're stewards of the land, and putting more of the United States off limits to responsible energy development just doesn't make sense.
Thank you, Kathleen. And I also want to note that you had mentioned earlier that there is some sort of a compromise that that even your group agreed to in terms of the oil and gas leases near the Chaco Canyon National Historical Park. There was a proposal to have the 10-year buffer, or rather a 10-mile buffer or a 5-mile buffer. And you agreed that, hey, look, and the Navajos too, right? Didn't they say a 5-mile buffer would be adequate for our people to be able to access? So it wasn't like it was sort of all or nothing, or the two sides, couldn't work together. There was a compromise. And I think that's what you had in place. And then at the last minute, this manager's amendment was snuck in. Is that right?
So neither a 5-mile or a 10-mile buffer is enshrined in law at this point.
Okay.
But because Congress doesn't pass anything really unless they sneak it into a huge big bill, which, we know that this reconciliation bill is having trouble for other reasons. But that compromise would do exactly what you said. It would do both. It would allow energy development and still afford more protection for the Chaco cultural resources.
Are there any final thoughts that you have just about warnings to the American people about what elements may be in or are in this spending bill that we might not be aware of? Because as you mentioned, they're just kind of throwing everything in there. And I think a lot of us are getting concerned as a story here, a story there, something pops up it's brought to our attention, and what next, right? I mean, what are there some other things in this bill that we need to be aware of in terms of our energy independence?
That's a great point. There's just so much thrown into this bill in all that would affect all facets of American life that it's really hard to keep track. And I think Nancy Pelosi was trying to pass it quickly before people understood really what's in it. But as the public gets more and more information about all the details, it becomes, it becomes worse and worse. So when you look at the oil and gas provisions that they put into this huge bill, they would literally make it almost impossible for a developer for oil and gas to be developed on new leases on federal lands. So I don't see how a producer could move forward on federal lands anymore. Federal waters would be difficult as well. So there are so many things in there that would increase our dependence on Russia and OPEC for energy because it would just simply be difficult to produce it here in the United States. It would put at risk about 20% of our energy supply.
Well, I'm very grateful that you are speaking out on this, bringing this to our attention, and really just trying to make people aware of some of the problems in this spending bill. And again, at Americans for Limited Government, we are urging our people to take action to reject this bill. Tell your members of Congress, your senators, your House of Representatives that this bill is no good. It spends too much, goes too far in terms of sort of trying to transform America. And in one of those ways would be through our energy. It would block access to our resources. So you can go in the description below this video and click the link there, or go to getliberty.org. You can take action with one click, send an email to your senators and your member of Congress and urge them to vote no on this $3.5 trillion spending bill. And Kathleen, is there anything that you are urging our people to do that would be helpful to you? Is there, visit your website, or is there any kind of action that you would encourage people to take?
I can't do anything more than what you're doing. That's great. We really appreciate the work that you do, getting this out there and getting your members to, and getting awareness from the public on why they should tell their members of Congress to vote no. The more voices are raised, the more this bill stinks even further.
Well, thank you very much, Kathleen. We are grateful for what you're doing, and you have a great day. And thanks everyone for joining us. We'll see you next time on Americans for Limited Government live stream. Thank you, Kathleen.
Thank you.
Let's see, I was officially ended, but I just wanted to make sure. So thank you, Kathleen. And I'll be in touch with Aaron for anything else, and I'll send you the link to this.
Great, appreciate
Thank
it.
you. Okay, bye.
Take care.
Oh. Well, actually, our little